I was super maximalist growing up. I had over 100 Barbie dolls. I would buy new clothes every time I went to a party, and I just loved stuff. So it all clicked for me when I heard the phrase that you don't need to be better at cleaning or organizing, you just need to have less stuff. That was such a turning point for me, and I think that's how my journey from maximalism to minimalism started, and today I'll take you on that journey. So how did it all start? I grew up in a standard middle-class Swedish family in the middle of nowhere, and I had a lot of stuff. When I was 18, I got my first job abroad, so I moved to France. I moved abroad not knowing how long I was going to be away for. It was sort of my intention to move for good, and I only had 2 suitcases with me, so that's where my minimalism journey really started. I realized it was really hard to move, especially moving countries, because you're limited to your suitcases. This was also the first time I had to carry my suitcases and organize everything myself. This was the first time I left my parents home. When I'd been in Paris for about 14 months, I moved to Japan. So again, it was this whole process again. I had accumulated stuff whilst living in France, and I realized that this would be a lot easier without all that stuff. Again, I only had the option of 2 suitcases because I couldn't really afford another one, and also just practically I couldn't carry a 3rd suitcase myself. Once in Japan, I read the KonMari book, and this really started my journey towards minimalism. I loved every single concept in this book, and I felt so similar to her. I used to always secretly throw out my dad and my brother's stuff, and in her book she said that that's something maybe you shouldn't do, but for me it was an absolute necessity to be able to survive in our house. If not, it would have just been clutter haven. So I lived in Japan, and after about 14 months there, I was moving back to Sweden for a little bit. And I realized that it would be a lot easier to move without all the stuff, especially moving continents. At the same time, I also started getting into environmentalism, and I started becoming more and more aware about the environmental impact of all our stuff, especially plastic and clothing. So this was another turning point for my journey towards minimalism, and it really made me more passionate about owning less and being more mindful in what I purchased. Especially after living in a country like Japan where there's so much plastic and so many cute little things that is sort of completely accepted to buy. In Sweden, it's not necessarily accepted to buy these cute things for yourself as an adult, whereas in Japan it completely is. So as a consequence, they have a lot of plastic, despite being very cute. Another thing I realized that was if I didn't have a lot of money, minimalism is always the answer because it is a lot cheaper. So when I left Japan, I didn't have a job for a while and I went to university. So again, minimalism became such a necessity because I simply couldn't afford to buy stuff. Then I moved to Italy, and when I lived in Italy, I did not have a lot of money and I paid a lot of rent. This was also the first time I shared an apartment with a friend, and we both realized quickly that the easiest way to be in a harmonious relationship is to keep it very clean. If you live in a cluttered space with someone, there will always be conflict ultimately, unless you're both very happy with the clutter. But if you're going to fit 2 people in one tiny space, I think it's really important to be respectful of each other, and a very easy way to do this is by not having lots of stuff. So I definitely grew up with this idea that you have to buy stuff. That's just something you do as a human in our society. You just buy stuff. It was such a weird dichotomy with my parents because they were both quite anti-stuff. So they sort of looked down on people buying expensive things, yet they bought lots of crap themselves. So I never really understood this, and that's when minimalism really shifted it for me. Because with minimalism, I realized that I don't have to buy stuff. You can wear the same clothing as many times as you want, to as many parties as you want, in as many pictures as you want, and you don't need stuff at home. My goodness, it was such a relief for me. After I lived in Italy, I lived in China. So living abroad really helped me on my minimalist journey. Pretty much every year to every other year, I've moved continent with 2 suitcases and only myself to carry them. I've had to be really mindful because if I can't carry it myself, and if it's too heavy for me to carry or too bulky, there's no way I can keep it. In China, there was another turning point for my minimalism, and that was the idea of freedom. For the first time, I felt super free not owning anything. I realized I didn't need more stuff, and especially not heavy physical items, and it was such a relief. And I felt so much better feeling this non-attachment to stuff. I felt so much detachment from my stuff that I realized I had to go back to Sweden and get rid of those things I'd never gotten rid of since I was 18 and left my home. That means selling all my childhood stuff, sorting out everything I had, making sure I had no stuff in storage. And there was this really need in me to take responsibility for everything I own, to make sure that no one else would have to take responsibility for my stuff. and to make sure that I was completely detached from my stuff, and also to make sure I had no connection to my childhood home. This was a really physical manifestation of letting go of who I used to be, letting go of attachment, and just letting go of stuff that I didn't need and didn't make me happier. I do still keep some sentimental things though, mainly photos. I love photos. So yeah, this was another really big point for me, and that's when I sort of went from minimalism to extreme minimalism. And I realized that if I can't bring it with me to New Zealand, then it's gonna have to go. Now I live in New Zealand, and it's a very easy place for me to be minimalist in, and especially an extreme minimalist, because I don't know how long I'm going to stay. Living like this really ensures a minimalism and also extremely responsible lifestyle. Everything we've acquired since coming to New Zealand, we have an end goal for. So we know where everything's going to go when we leave. So if we're leaving, we're going to sell my bed base and sell the bed. The plants will be very easy to sell. So we have an idea of the end life of every single product that we own. And I think that's extremely important. Before minimalism, I didn't used to think of the end life of products or the start life. So it's so important to realize that the things you own didn't look like this. They didn't just appear from nowhere. And that was a really big point for me in learning more about eco-friendliness and minimalism. The idea that everything has to be processed and manufactured and shipped and packaged and then opened and then one day also have to be thrown away and discarded is really important to think about when you buy new stuff. And I think that is the number one thing that helps me now to not get more stuff, because I couldn't possibly stand the fact that I would buy something new and that would one day go to landfill. So that was my story from maximalist to extreme minimalist. Thank you so much, Mystic Wanderer, for suggesting this video topic. I thought it was such a fun idea, so I wanted to make it straight away. So yeah, let me know what you think. Too much information, not enough information. I feel so much calmer, I have so much less anxiety, and mainly there is less cleaning to do. Minimalism for me is non-attachment, preparing for the end of life of my stuff and also myself, taking responsibility, and environmentally friendly living together with aesthetics. So thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed making this video. I hope you liked it too. Please give it a like and leave a comment telling me if you also were a maximalist growing up. And remember to subscribe to this channel because it really helps. And I will see you next week with a new video. Bye! Can they hear that? What I didn't realize was living a maximalist harder. That's why I love minimalism.